Okay, so Blender animation, this will be the basics. So to get started, I will make use of BlenderKit and I will add the following chess set over here. So I will add that onto the default cube. I will select it, press comma on the numpad so we can better see this. I will now press Z in order to swap this to material preview so we can also see those textures. So let's get started with the animation. We have the timeline over here on the bottom, so by default we're going to have 250 frames and we can timeline. Now at a frame rate of 30 FPS, that means we're going to need a total of 30 frames in order to define 1 second of animation. So let's get started and create the first animation. I will select one of the pawns over here. Let's say that I want to move this one. So I will select it, and as you can see within frame 1, I will also enable auto keying, and this will make it a lot easier. And now I need to specify that I want to add a keyframe for this. So if I only want to add a keyframe for a certain element, for example, grabbing on the y-axis, I can press G. Afterwards, I can press Y for the axis, and I can press Enter. And I'm going to have that keyframe added over here. But keep in mind that that has been added for the location over here. As we can see, the location will be with yellow. That means that the software waits for various movements within the scene to make the interpolation in time. Therefore, I will go, for example, to frame 30, and I want this pawn to move over here. So we're going to see that this will be -0, 1. So I can add in a numeric value if I want it to snap directly in the middle over there. And now if I'm gonna stop the keyframe, auto keying, and I will scrap the animation, I will see that we have the following. You can also start the animation. You can press the following button over here. So for back and forth, with right arrow and left arrow, you can scrap the animation timeline. As we can see, that pawn will do the following animation. If you want this to be, let's say, a longer animation, we want it to be 2 seconds long, all we have to do is select the keyframe over here, and I will add it over here. So I will translate this all the way to 60. Now this means that frames will be required for that pawn to move. It will move like that. If you want this to be delayed, so we don't want it to start right within the first second, you can also move that initial keyframe. For example, I can move it over here to 30. That means by default, if I'm going to press space, you're going to see that only at frame 30, that pawn will start moving. Now, keep in mind that each component within Blender, so each 3D model, will have an individual timeline. As you can see, I have those keyframes added for this pawn, but if I will select another one, we're going to see that timeline will be empty. That is because the selected component doesn't have any movement. Now, let's do the following. Let's say that starting from frame 60, the black will also move. So maybe I will select this pawn. If I want this to start at frame 60, I will enable auto keying over here. If you're going to press I on the keyboard and enter, this will enable keyframes for everything. So both for the location, rotation, scaling, as well as other parameters. So keep that in mind. You can press Y and that will just add a keyframe for everything. Or you can right click over here and you can insert those frames over here with insert keyframes. Now, since I only want this to move from frame 60, let's say that all the way up to 90, so this will move a lot faster. I want this to move maybe only one square over here. So I press G in order to grab this. On the y-axis, I will move it over here, and this will be 0.05, and that will be right in the middle. If I will stop the auto keying, if I will start the animation from start, delay for 1 second, then the white will move. Afterwards, we have the defined. And this is how we can animate within Blender. Now, let's say that the white will also do the following move. So I will select this pawn, and again, the same workflow. I just want it to start over here. I will press I will also hit enter. I will go, for example, to frame 120, and I want this to move on the y-axis over here. I can type in minus 0.5 if I want that to be right in the middle. Now, we're going to notice over here that if I want to move this bishop over here, this will move both in X and Y. So in order to do that, let's say that from frame 120, I want to move this. I will enable auto key, press I to add that keyframe, go all the way to 150 in this case, and if I will press G, I will start grabbing this. This will allow me to move it on all axes, as you can see, by moving the mouse around. But if I want to constrain this only on the X and Y, I can hold down Shift Z, and you're going to see that we can only move the pawn within this plane, so X and Y. And I want to move it over here. If I'm going to click once, we're going to have this move feature over here, add. So this is the last feature that we edited. If you want this to be exactly in the middle, we can change that to 0.05, 0.05 exactly. That will be square in the middle over there. If you're going to run the animation, we're going to see that now this will move like that on the diagonal. So we have that movement. We can see those, but they are also set to Bezier. So if I'm going to start adding a lot of animation for only one element, let's say that I will do that with this pawn. So let's say that starting from 150, I want this to move over here another square. So I will grab the location for this. I will press GY, and I will go to 180, and I want this to move on the y-axis over here. I will just move it over here, even though it's not possible in chess, because I want to show you exactly what happens over here. So this is, it looks like a linear movement, but the movement will actually be influenced by a Bezier. So since I only move this within a line, this is not that visible. But let's say that now, starting from this, I want to go again 3 squares over here. So I will select this, grab it on the, so press G, press E to insert those keyframes, and all the way to 200, I want to move this on the x-axis over here. And let's analyze that animation. So we see it, and you see how this will move on a curvature. So I'm slightly going to scrub through this, and we're going to see that the path that this pawn will take will be something like this. Even though we set the initial animation all the way over here and afterwards over here. This is because all animations within Blender are influenced by a default Bezier curve, and we need to swap that to be a linear motion. Now, in order to do that, we can do it directly over here within the editor, so within the timeline, or we can jump within the graph editor. Over here within the graph editor, we're also going to visualize those movements. But to make this simple, I'm just going to swap back to the timeline. And over here, I will select those 2 keyframes. If I'm going to press T, I can set the keyframe interpolation. And you're going to see over here that by default, this is set to Bezier. But if I'm going to swap this to linear, now if I'm going to scrap the animation, take a look at what will happen. So we still have the same movement, as you can see, influenced by that Bezier over there. So let's see exactly why that didn't work. So interpolation mode, I want this to be linear. I'm going to scrub, again, that will not be a linear movement. Okay, so let's jump within the time graph over here. I will select everything, press T over here, and I want this to be linear. We're going to have the, and we're going to see how that swapped over here, but we'll go like this, and afterwards to not fully smooth as we intended. As we can see, that motion path, we can now also visualize it over here. So if I'm going to go on display, we can also visualize the number of frames. But the main problem is that we still have that interpolation problem. So we see the pawn move like that. I will jump back to the timeline and let's analyze this. To better understand what happens over here, we're gonna enable the path visualization over here. So jump to object properties, and over here we can calculate the object path. I will want this to be for the scene frame range, and we're gonna see that this will be the movement of this pawn. Now, since this was created using AutoKey, we see over here the following interpolation. So the pawn will initially move all the way over here and only afterwards go back there. So I will go to 150, I will select and delete those keyframes. We can also update the path, and now we only have this movement from 90 to 120 over here. And let's say that over here from 120 I will also delete this one. I want to add the movement of the pawn all the way over here. So I will not use AutoKeying now, I will make this manually. So at 120 I'm gonna press I, and this will enable all the keyframes. And I will go over here, let's say all the way up to 180, and I want this to move on the y-axis. So I'll move it over here. This should be minus 0.5 if you want to be exactly straight in the middle. And now I want to record this position, so I'm going to press I and enter. And as we can see, we have the following path added over here. This hasn't been updated within the path, within the one that we can visualize, but we have the motion. If I'm going to go over here and hit update path, we have that added as well. And now we're going to see that movement will be set like. Okay, so now for the following part, we want the pawn to move over there. So again, we are going to keyframe this manually. So I will press, in this case, I in order to enable that keyframe position over here. I will go all the way to 200, and I want this to be moved on the x-axis all the way over here. I can type in 0.2 if I want to add that numeric value. And again, I will press I in order to keyframe those. And if you're going to check the movement, now the pawn will move like this. And we can also update the path. And if I will start the animation from start, how we set this animation, so the initial pawn will move, afterwards this one. We see regarding the speed over here at the end this. So if you just want to further adjust that, you can easily do it like this. So let me move this all the way over here, all the way to the back, 250. Move up the following speed, so the initial pawn, the second one. So we have that overlap with the bishop doing the animation at the same time, but overall we see how we can control that movement in order to be linear. Okay, enjoy this kind of content. I will position a similar video on the left side, and you're also going to find the subscribe button to the right. So that's it. Thanks for watching.